In July 2021, our homicide unit received information that Mr. Strong, while incarcerated, had disclosed information pertaining to the location of Kandis Fitzpatrick's remains. I can confirm today that the remains found last November are those of Kandis Fitzpatrick. Rori Hache and Kandis Fitzpatrick were both young women killed 9 years apart by convicted murderer Adam Strong.
It started with a routine plumbing call. In December of 2017, a maintenance worker in Oshawa, Ontario, responded to a backed-up drain. The homeowner had complained of foul smells and slow drainage, but as the worker began investigating, what he pulled from the pipe wasn't grease or hair, it was meat. At first, he thought it might be animal remains, but something felt off. The texture, the smell, the sheer amount of it. He called the police. When officers arrived at the basement apartment beneath a small, unassuming home in a quiet residential street, seemingly for a quiet checkup. There, they met a man named Adam Strong. As he opened the door, Adam appeared apprehensive and then said something that would haunt them forever. "Okay, you got me. It's a body." When they examined the contents more closely, their worst fears were confirmed. It was human flesh. Adam became calm, compliant. The search that followed uncovered horrors that no one was prepared for. Dismembered remains, chilling evidence, and signs that this wasn't just a single act of violence. What they discovered at the basement of Adam Strong's home would haunt the city of Oshawa, Canada, forever. If you're captivated by true crime stories and want to stay updated on the darkest cases, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We release in-depth crime documentaries just like this one, uncovering the chilling details behind real-life mysteries. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button now. We will start by introducing a teenager who had been missing for months. Rori Hache was a young woman born in July 1999. Her life was a tapestry of vibrant moments, complex relationships, and personal challenges. At just 18, she had already experienced a lifetime's worth of highs and lows. Born and raised in Oshawa, Ontario, Rori was known for her spirited personality and infectious energy. She had a sharp wit and a fearless demeanor, often standing up for those she cared about. Her laughter was contagious, and she had an uncanny ability to make friends wherever she went. But beneath this vivacious exterior, Rori grappled with personal struggles that many were unaware of. Rori came from a family with a notable legacy. She was the granddaughter of Bernie Giddon, a prominent figure in the Canadian biker scene and founder of the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club. This connection cast a long shadow, influencing perceptions and adding layers to her already intricate life story. In her teenage years, Rori faced the challenges of addiction. Introduced to substances at a young age, she found herself battling dependencies that threatened to derail her future. However, those close to her knew of her determination to overcome these obstacles. She had been making concerted efforts to turn her life around, seeking support and exploring paths to recovery. Amidst these personal battles, Rori discovered she was pregnant. This revelation brought a mix of emotions, but ultimately became a beacon of hope for her. She was determined to embrace motherhood, viewing it as an opportunity for a fresh start and a renewed sense of purpose. She was a regular at a youth center where workers noticed her constant struggle to get better. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Rori's actions painted a picture of a young woman seeking stability. On August 29, 2017, she was taken to a local hospital by her friend and the friend's mom, as Rori had been complaining of pain due to the pregnancy with the friend and her mother leaving shortly afterward. However, feeling overwhelmed or perhaps impatient, Rori left shortly after arriving, not waiting for the scheduled appointment as seen on the hospital footage. This was the last time Rori was ever seen alive. After a few days without any sign of Rori, concern grew among those who knew her routine, especially at the youth center. Her mother, Shanann Dion, and friends reported her missing, initiating a search that would grip the community. Flyers bearing Rori's image were distributed, vigils were held, and local media covered her disappearance extensively. Friends, family, and even strangers joined in the efforts, hoping for her safe return. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to wane, replaced by a gnawing dread. Unbeknownst to them all, Rori's journey had already taken a tragic turn, one that would only come to light in the most harrowing of ways. On September 11, 2017, just under 2 weeks since Rori Hache was last seen, a fisherman was out on the water with his grandson near the Oshawa harbor, doing what he had done countless times before, casting his line, watching the horizon. It was a place of quiet, where the hum of the city faded into the breeze off Lake Ontario. But that calm was shattered when something strange caught his attention near the edge of the pier. It was large, heavy, wrapped in plastic. At first he thought it might be a bag of garbage or some discarded debris from the shoreline. But as it drifted closer, he saw the shape more clearly. It was a torso, human, floating just beneath the surface. He immediately called the authorities. Police arrived and quickly cordoned off the area. The remains were partially decomposed, bearing no clothing, no obvious marks of identification. But what was immediately clear was that this was not an accident. This wasn't someone who had drowned. The body had been intentionally mutilated, dismembered. The body was without head and limbs and left to drift in the harbor. It was the kind of discovery that pulls a community into a collective state of dread. Rumors spread. Was it a stranger? A local? Was there a killer on the loose? As investigators began collecting evidence from the water and shoreline, the body was sent for forensic analysis. DNA samples were taken and tested against the database. Because of the missing parts, identification was difficult, and it took almost 2 months by November for police to compare the DNA of the torso and that of Rori supplied by her family to confirm that the torso belonged to Rori Hache. For Rori's family, it confirmed their worst nightmare. Her mother, Shenandoah, had been clinging to hope that Rori was staying with friends, hope that she was just trying to get clean or taking some time away, hope that no news meant good news. But now, that hope was gone. The police made the announcement publicly. Rori Hache had been murdered. They now had a body, or part of one, but no weapon, no suspect, no answers. A full-scale homicide investigation was launched, and investigators began the difficult task of piecing together Rori's final movements. Surveillance footage from downtown Oshawa was pulled and reviewed frame by frame. Slowly, a timeline emerged. Rori had not been seen at any location after her hospital visit. She had simply disappeared. There were no known signs of a struggle, no dramatic confrontation, no sudden vanishing point. She seemed to dissolve from the frame of the city without explanation. Detectives interviewed her friends, her boyfriend, youth center staff, and local community workers. Everyone said the same thing. Rori was vulnerable, yes, but she wasn't reckless. And she had been trying to change. The pregnancy had shifted her focus. She wanted a better life. The deeper the police looked, the more the case felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. There was no known suspect, no leads, no motive, and aside from the torso, no other remains had been recovered. Whoever had done this had gone to disturbing lengths to conceal their crime. They had dismembered her body, they had scattered the evidence, and they had done it all without leaving a single trace behind. For weeks, the investigation stalled, and then something happened. Not out in the harbor, not in a shelter or on a street camera, but in a basement. In the most unexpected of places. The truth wasn't buried, it was being flushed, right beneath their feet. By the winter of 2017, the mystery of what happened to Rori Hache had gone cold. Her torso had been recovered months earlier, but the investigation had stalled. The community grieved, and her family waited, desperate for answers, haunted by the fact that her killer was still out there. But those answers wouldn't come from a breakthrough in the case, not from a confession or a witness or a lucky surveillance clip. They would come from a clogged drain. In December 2017, new tenants moved into a rental apartment on McMillan Drive in Oshawa. A modest 2-story house split into apartments. It wasn't long before they noticed something was wrong. The smell. At first, they thought it might be old food trapped in the pipes. Then came the slow drainage, the gurgling sounds from the sinks. A stench, thick and putrid, began to seep through the plumbing, spreading through the house. It was worse in the basement unit, a place occupied by a quiet, older tenant named Adam Strong. Eventually, the problem became unbearable. The new homeowners called in a plumber to investigate what they assumed was a typical blockage. What he found was anything but typical. As the plumber began working on the pipes in the basement, he pulled out large chunks of what looked like decomposing meat. It was soft, pale, and oddly textured. At first, he thought it might be pork. Maybe someone had tried to dispose of spoiled food down the drain, but the more he removed, the more unsettled he became. This wasn't meat, not from an animal. This was something else. The plumber stopped what he was doing and called the police. Officers with the Durham Regional Police arrived on the scene, unsure of what they were walking into. The home had no history of violent crime. The man in the basement, Adam Strong, had no known connection to Rori Hache, at least not publicly. But when they entered the apartment, what they found turned their stomachs. It wasn't just the smell, though that was overwhelming. The entire apartment felt off, cold, clinical. Something about it didn't sit right. And then came the moment that changed everything. When the officers told Adam Strong what had been found in the drain, he didn't run. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. He looked at them calmly and said, "Okay, you got me. The gig's up. It's a body." The words hung in the air, unreal, chilling. It was a confession, spoken as casually as if he'd been caught with stolen property, not human remains. Strong was immediately arrested. While in a squad car outside, he continued to talk, saying, "If you want the rest of her, she's in the freezer, and she is pretty defleshed." The officers immediately located the freezer. What was inside would confirm everyone's worst fears. Wrapped in black garbage bags were the rest of Rori Hache's remains. Her limbs, her head, the parts that hadn't washed up in Lake Ontario. They had been preserved, carefully packaged, and stacked on top of one another like pieces of meat. Adam Strong had dismembered her and kept her frozen, all while continuing to live in the same space. The home was sealed off, and a full forensic search began. Investigators would spend days combing through every inch of the basement suite, collecting samples, cataloging evidence, and preparing for what would become one of the most disturbing cases in Canadian history. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as officers came and went, removing boxes, bags, and finally a large chest freezer from the basement. Adam Strong hadn't just disposed of a body. He had lived with it. The air in the basement unit was heavy with the smell of rot and chemicals. The space was small, dimly lit, and eerily clean in certain areas, as though someone had tried very hard to scrub away a crime they couldn't quite erase. But the truth was everywhere. On the floor were streaks of dried blood that had seeped into the grout and along the baseboards. Bottles of bleach and industrial cleaners were tucked into cabinets and corners. Saws and blades, stained and dulled by use, were found in drawers and boxes. Police worked methodically, documenting every square inch of the apartment, but the deeper they went, the darker it got. They uncovered journals filled with twisted thoughts, pages of violent fantasies, domination, control. He had written obsessively, not about remorse or confusion, but power. These weren't the writings of someone who had snapped. These were the notes of someone who had planned. They also found a vast collection of violent pornography, extreme graphic material involving torture, dismemberment, and simulated killings. It was all carefully stored, cataloged, and clearly consumed regularly. By the end of the search, detectives had no doubt Rori Hache had been lured into that apartment. She had been killed there, dismembered there, stored there, and her killer had gone about his life just steps away from her frozen body. When investigators tried to get more from Strong, he shut down. He refused to speak further without legal counsel. The smirk he had worn during his arrest disappeared, replaced by silence. But they didn't need him to talk. The apartment told the story. Every corner of it. They were no longer looking for a missing girl. They weren't even trying to prove a murder. They were unraveling the twisted world of a man who had turned fantasy into reality and thought he could get away with it. For months, the name Adam Strong meant nothing to the public, just another tenant in a quiet Oshawa neighborhood, just another man living alone. But after his arrest, everyone wanted to know, who was this person? Who could do something so horrifying and still manage to blend in? Adam Jeffrey Strong was in his mid-40s at the time of Rori Hache's murder. He lived alone in the basement unit of a split house on McMillan Drive. He didn't work a steady job. He wasn't married. He didn't have children. He lived a quiet, isolated life, largely disconnected from the world around him. To his neighbors, he was strange, but not threatening. He kept to himself, didn't say much. He'd occasionally chat with people on the porch, offer a cigarette, or wave from a distance. Some recalled seeing him sitting on the front steps watching the street like a man with nowhere to go. He was the kind of neighbor you might overlook, someone you'd see enough to recognize but not enough to question. In hindsight, the red flags were there. Tenants who'd moved in and out of the building over the years had complained about strange noises coming from the basement at night. Thumping, dragging sounds, even bursts of music or yelling. The kind of disturbances that seem odd in the moment, but easy to dismiss. Others recalled the odor. It wasn't constant, but every so often, especially in the warmer months, an unbearable stench would waft through the vents, a mix of chemicals and decay. People chalked it up to bad plumbing or spoiled food. No one could have imagined what it really was. Strong had a criminal record, but nothing that would have drawn much attention. A few minor offenses, some shoplifting, a weapons charge. Nothing that screamed danger, and nothing that would put him on a list of serious offenders. But beneath that surface was a much darker reality. Adam Strong had an obsession with violent sexual content. Investigators would later uncover terabytes of disturbing material, videos and images involving domination, mutilation, and death. He had spent years feeding that obsession, not passively, actively, collecting, categorizing, indulging. He wasn't just a man with violent fantasies. He was a man preparing to act on them. The signs were there, but they were subtle. Easy to ignore until it was too late. In the wake of his arrest, neighbors looked back with horror. The smells, the sounds, the odd behavior, the heavy bags being taken out late at night. The fact that he never seemed to go anywhere, yet always seemed busy. No one had reported anything, not because they didn't care, but because they never imagined what was happening just below their feet. Adam Strong had been living in that basement for years, alone, unbothered, and completely unmonitored. By the time anyone noticed what he was capable of, it was already far too late. While investigators were still processing the horrors inside Adam Strong's apartment, they came across a knife tucked away in his belongings, one of several tools collected from the scene. It had dried blood on it with clear markings. They sent it for forensic analysis. When the forensic results came back, detectives expected confirmation of what they already knew, that the knife had been used on Rori Hache, but that's not what they found. The DNA on the blade didn't belong to Rori, it belonged to someone else. 19-year-old Kandis Fitzpatrick, missing since 2008. Suddenly, this wasn't just a case about one victim. This wasn't a single act of violence. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Kandis had vanished nearly a decade earlier, long before Rori. She had struggled with the same challenges, a turbulent home life, addiction, periods of homelessness. She was vulnerable, but she was loved. Her family never stopped looking for her, never stopped believing that something terrible had happened. But for years, there were no leads, no witnesses, no evidence. Kandis Fitzpatrick had simply disappeared. Until now. Her DNA on Adam Strong's knife changed everything. The odds of contamination were virtually zero. It meant she had been in that apartment, or at least that Strong had come into contact with her in a way that left her genetic material behind. Police now believe Kandis had been murdered too, though her body was never found. Her father had long suspected she met with foul play, but he never had proof. He'd always feared she was taken by someone who preyed on women like her, women who could vanish without headlines, without fanfare. And now, here it was, the proof, hidden for nearly 10 years in the basement of a man no one had thought to suspect. Adam Strong wasn't just a killer, he was a predator. And he had been doing this long before Rori. It raised impossible questions. How many others had he targeted? How many women had passed through that apartment? How many stories had ended in silence? The investigation, once focused solely on Rori Hache, now expanded. Police dug deeper into Strong's past, his habits, his connections, his movements going back years. They searched for more missing persons, more unsolved cases, any sign that this pattern extended further. For the families of both girls, the grief became compounded. 2 lives, 2 young women, both drawn into the orbit of a man who hid his darkness in plain sight. For Kandis, there would be no body to bury, no grave to visit. But at least, after all those years, the truth had found its way to the surface, and with it a terrifying realization. Rori Hache hadn't been Adam Strong's first victim. She had been his last. In the fall of 2020, nearly 3 years after his arrest, Adam Strong finally stood trial. He entered the courtroom with the same eerie calm he had shown the day police knocked on his door. He sat at the defense table, eyes vacant, posture relaxed, like a man who still didn't grasp the magnitude of what he had done. He pleaded not guilty. Not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Rori Hache, not guilty to the charge of manslaughter in the death of Kandis Fitzpatrick. But the Crown was prepared. Prosecutors laid out the full extent of the horror that had taken place inside that basement apartment. They presented a case built not on speculation, but on evidence. There was the dismembered body of Rori Hache, her remains discovered both in Lake Ontario and inside Strong's freezer. There was the DNA of Kandis Fitzpatrick found on a knife in his possession, even though her body was never recovered. There was the plumbing clogged with human flesh that led police directly to his door. And there was the confession. He hadn't whispered it. He hadn't broken down in shame. He had said it with flat indifference. You got me. It's a body. Jurors listened to testimony that painted a disturbing picture, not just of a murder, but of a man who had fantasized, planned, and executed unspeakable violence. A man who had turned his private world of domination and death into a grim reality. The defense could offer little in the way of doubt. There was no alibi, no alternate theory, no justification. After a lengthy trial, the verdict was read. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Rori Hache. Guilty of manslaughter in the death of Kandis Fitzpatrick. Rori's family wept. Kandis's family sat in stunned silence. For years, they had waited for justice. Now, they had it. During sentencing, the judge looked directly at Adam Strong and delivered a dangerous predator. Strong was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. He showed no emotion, no anger, no sorrow, just the same blank expression he'd worn from the beginning. But outside the courtroom, the reaction was very different. For the families of Rori and Kandis, the sentence marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A life without their daughters, but at least now without their killer walking free. The trial was over. Adam Strong would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But for the families of Rori Hache and Kandis Fitzpatrick, the sentence could never bring back what they had lost. Rori's mother, Shanann, became a voice not only for her daughter, but for countless other young women who fall through the cracks. She spoke candidly about the pain of addiction, about the stigma that often shadows people who are struggling, and how society too often turns away when help is needed most. Rori had been trying. She had been pregnant. She had been looking for a way forward, but no one protected her. Kandis Fitzpatrick's family finally got a body to bury, or rather parts, when in July of 2021, perhaps resigned to a life behind bars, Adam finally admitted to a prison guard where Kandis's body was buried. They took him to the location, and her remains were retrieved. Her family finally had closure after her burial. In Oshawa, the community struggled to process it all. How could a man like Adam Strong live among them, undetected for nearly a decade? How many times had he walked past a neighbor, nodded to a passerby, while hiding unimaginable horrors in his basement? The case forced a reckoning, not just with the justice system, but with how society treats its most vulnerable. Rori and Kandis weren't disposable. They were young women with dreams, families, stories. But because they struggled with addiction, with instability, their lives were too easy to overlook, and the man who took those lives counted on exactly that. The signs were there, the warnings, the red flags, but no one looked closely enough. Rori and Kandis never met. They came from different worlds, vanished in different years, but they were bound by the same fate and failed by the same silence. In the end, it wasn't a break in the case or a brilliant piece of detective work that uncovered the truth. It was a clogged drain, a desperate plumbing call that unraveled the secrets buried beneath a quiet house and exposed the monster living within it. And if you're fascinated by true crime, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an upload. We have more gripping stories coming soon, shedding light on cases that deserve to be told. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.